stop video. So this is good to go. Present. Where's my share screen? Yeah. Share.
So once we have our little informal chat, I'll leave you to go up to the mic, mate, and do your thing, and I'll just chill out.
Yeah. So the only issue with this is that so they'll be saying, mute. All right, we are starting video in 3, 2. That's where we want to be. That's good.
Okay. Guys, welcome. Welcome to Breathing for Life. This is a workshop that Luke and I have been very passionate about. It's a topic that we discuss a lot and something that we both feel like is critical to health, and that's why we're putting it together. Breathing is a big topic right now, and with a lot of the stress that we're seeing everywhere around the world, breathing can offer us a good intermediary to buffer the stress that we feel throughout the day. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Excited to have you in my clinic. Excited to get the workshop underway. I had Steve knock on my door a few weeks ago. He said, Luke, what do you know about breathing? I said, Steve, I've been doing it all my life. Let's do this. And that's kind of how the workshop was born. Kind of like Steve, I think breathing is very, very important, but very underrated as well. So as you'll see in parts of the presentation later, breath is very important, not just for things like relaxation and calm, as Steve mentioned, in times like this where everyone's a little bit stressed out, but you'll also see later on in the presentation just exactly how it works and how it has so many flow-on effects to the rest of the system, even into places you thought might not be related at all. So I see a lot of problems clinically that are actually related to poor breathing habits, whether that be anxiety, whether that be lower back problems, whether that be problems in the upper limb as well. So I'm excited to share some of that stuff with you today.
Yeah, we'll be covering a lot of stuff. Feel free to take notes. You will get the slides at the end of today as well. But just absorb as much as you can. Take part in the exercises. We're going to do different breathing exercises. If it brings up some anxiety or some adrenaline, that can be all part of the exercise. I'll explain what each one is designed to do. And Luke will take you through some stretches, more some down regulation stuff, and we'll finish off with some down regulating activities as well.
That'll be the best.
Cool. We're going to get the prezzo started now. Here we are. Okay. So, guys, welcome to Breathing for Life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do with breathing. So breathing is a big part of my practice as a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I own a company called Barefoot Health. We've been going since 2011, doing personal training to start off with, but since have expanded into nutrition and lifestyle coaching. And that's where the breathing part comes in for me. I use breath to help with fitness and nutrition, but mostly with the lifestyle stress management stuff. I'm an Oxygen Advantage instructor, so I've learned from Patrick McEwen about his techniques, and I implement a lot of that myself. I've also been breathing since 1988. This is where breathing fits in for me. Breathing is really at the bottom of the healthy living pyramid. Like if we think about health and what it is, it's really the things that we're doing all the time. So if you think about the things you're doing all the time, it looks something like this. You're breathing right now. And if you're breathing in a dysfunctional way, then that's going to lead on to flow-on effects down the line. Sleeping, the same thing. Hydration, very important. Nutrition and movement get a lot of the attention that we hear about in health, but really it's the stuff that we're doing all the time. That's the stuff that's going to have the most lifelong effects towards your overall health. And why breathing? So Albie and I spoke a little bit about this in the introduction, but really breathing's fundamental for life. Without it, you die. You know that. Breathing is so important. You're doing it every minute of every day. It's also used for detoxification. We regulate our blood chemistry through breathing, and that's at the foundational level. As a tool, though, this can be used for well-being, for mental well-being, as a tool for performance. We'll speak about that shortly. Digestion, and also to upregulate and downregulate, which is very, very important in this day and age. Knowing when to get yourself going, but also knowing how and when to tone yourself down. Breathing is being used it's being used forever, guys, in different sort of communities. But now with the way things work in the world, everything is coming together and different groups are starting to speak to each other. This, if you Google Swami Rama on the left here, this guy is he's been a breathwork practitioner his whole life and has done some amazing things just through a breathing practice. In the freediving community, if you've ever been involved with freediving, you know that they use very similar techniques to what, say, Swami Rama would use. And with Kundalini yoga, if you've ever done a Kundalini yoga class before, this is all revolved around breath. But really, there's lots of similarities between these three groups. They're much more similar than they are different. They just use different language to explain what they're doing. Over on the left here, Swami Rama is obviously going to have a more spiritual approach, whereas the freediving community, this is all for performance and using breath to facilitate what they do. And the current state of breath work, breathing is, it's a hot topic right now. There's been a lot of clinical trials being done about using breath to monitor and to help mental well-being. And different sorts of techniques have come up. So you might have seen Wim Hof before. Wim uses a breathing protocol to get himself into a state where he can handle extreme stress. And this is used in extreme cold, extreme heat, and with performance as well. Holotropic breathing is an incredible breathing practice. I've done a few holotropic breathing practices myself, and this is the high end of a psychedelic experience with breathing. That's the holotropic method. It's been going for a long time. Kundalini goes into holotropic as well. The potato breathing techniques by a Russian scientist, and this is being used for mental health, but also performance. In the yoga world, they call it pranayama, and pranayama means the life force of breathing, and prana means life force. Ayama means extend, so it's extending our life force. That's what they believe breathing can do. The oxygen advantage, this is a technique by Patrick McEwen, who's responsible for a lot of the information we find about breathing at the moment, someone who I've learned from. And as I mentioned, lots of clinical trials going on at the moment to facilitate breath in all areas of life. And why do we want to breathe? I think breath work, where it can be handy, yes, we can achieve a peak performance state through breathing. But really the most powerful thing for me is that we're turning unconscious behaviors into conscious ones. If you think about a lot of the behavior that we go throughout the day, a lot of it is unconscious. We wake up to the sound of the alarm, we get a feeling for fatigue, so we'll have a coffee, you feel some stress and you might react in a certain way. A lot of these behaviors are simply unconscious. And what breathing can do, breathing can offer the buffer between something being unconscious to being like, hey, I've got this. I'm fully conscious right now and I can make the appropriate response. Here we have breathing. Breathing really can be in the middle here. This can bring us into a state of peak performance. If you think about someone who's really stimulated or a state where we're really stimulated, yeah, it can be fun to have 3 coffees, but then fatigue and overstimulation is only going to get us so far. At the other end, if we're sleepy and lethargic, we're not going to get much done. Peak performance is a mix between focus and stimulation, and that's what breathing can give us. I love this quote from Viktor Frankl. He's an amazing writer. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. I really suggest you read that book. It's an amazing book about will and determination and what gets us through life. And he came up with this quote: between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So if you think about that, and you think about that space between stimulus and response, that's the space that makes change, how you respond in that space. And the choice is yours. Looks something like this. We have a stimulus, we have a response. In the middle is that buffer zone. How are you going to respond to things? The problem is this choice section, this is being really disturbed at the moment with all the media that we see and all the stress that's around and all the stimulation that's around. Many of us might feel that we only have so much of a choice to respond. in a way that we'd like to respond. Insert breathing, insert meditation, insert good, healthy behaviors. That choice is expanded, and our ability to properly respond to our stimulus is in a much better track. So that's why we want to learn a breathing practice. A little bit about the nervous system now. This is an important thing to know. Before we go further, you do need to know this. It's known as the two branches of the nervous system. This is something you may have heard of before. The sympathetic over here is the fight or flight response. So in the fight or flight response, you have, pretty similar to what I've got now, dilated pupils, increased heartbeat, relaxed airways. This is when we are in a state of stress. We think about you being chased by a tiger in the jungle way back when. This system is designed to have you fight something or run away from something. It's a really important response. Without it, we wouldn't be here. And you might, if you really want to test this, if you think of yourself in the next stressful situation that you're in, say you get cut off in traffic or you've got some sort of threat in front of you, you will actually feel the blood go to your hands and go to your legs to fight or to run away. It's an incredible response. It happens so quickly. The parasympathetic response, this is the feed and breathe, rest and digest. This is when the body can recover and do its thing. So this is when we find constricted pupils, slower heartbeat, airways constrict as well. Our digestion can actually do its thing, because if we're in a stress state, the last thing the body wants to do is to digest food. It's the last thing on its priorities. Its priority is to get you through whatever stress you're getting into. We also inhibit glucose release, whereas sympathetic will enhance the glucose release. Looks something like that. A lot of us might feel that we're living like the gazelle a lot of the time. Parasympathetic looks like this. Rest and digest, feed and breathe. The chase is over. This is all well and good, but the problem is that we live in a sympathetic dominant environment. I've shown this slide to a few people and they've said, even this slide looks stressful. And it does. A lot of these photos are inherently stressful. The bright lights, the constant moving, lady with the mask here, the screens. This is a very sympathetic dominant environment that we live in, which in itself isn't a bad thing, but if we don't know how to switch off from that, then our body is going to be in a state of dysfunction. It won't be able to do the things that you want it to do and that it needs to do. Feed, breathe, digest. All those things. The biggest problems we have in health are the most simple things as well. The things like feeding, the things like digestion, breathing as well. The result is, as the United Nations says, stress is the 21st century health epidemic. And it doesn't take a genius to work that out. You can look around and just see that stress is everywhere, especially at the moment with everything that's going on. You'll feel the stress as you walk around the streets. What's important to know though, stress is not bad. Stress is there for a reason. If you are confronted with a situation, you need to have the appropriate stress response. When Tia's under a heavy snatch like this, she needs the adrenaline flowing through her body and the cortisol flowing through her body. If she can't do that, she won't make the lift. If you can't do that in life, then you're not going to be living very healthily. It's about that balance between both branches of the nervous system. And the difference of stresses here, the acute stress, this is when we see the short-term stress. And this is typically said that short-term stress is a positive effect on the body. So the best way to think about short-term eustress, acute stress, is exercise. We purposely stress the body to have it grow stronger over time. In this acute stress, we see increase in heart rate, adrenaline, CO2 levels go down, and we are purposely stressing out the body with the idea that you go into a parasympathetic zone afterwards, that you can actually recover from the work. You've probably heard that it's not the exercise itself that makes you stronger, it's the recovery from that exercise. So stress in itself here, not bad at all. Where it becomes a problem and where we see the body break down is with chronic stress. When that stress just doesn't go away. And this can be a bad relationship. This can be a job that you don't like. This can be the same traffic jam every day. If that stress is chronic, this is where we see the body to break down in these various ways. And that happens over a period of time. And it happens with phases as well. The stimulation here, this is all good in the green. Yeah, we've got some cortisol, we've got some adrenaline, feeling good after our workout. The adaptation phase, phase 2, cortisol stress is still high up here. But if that hangs around, this is when we start to see exhaustion. This is where overtraining comes in. If you're going from a high intensity workout to a high intensity lifestyle, the body simply will start breaking down. So really our goal is to bring us back to here so that you can properly stimulate the body and you can recover. And then we go back to the green again. That's where breathing can come in. We went through this at the start, acute and chronic stress and where it can bring us, and upregulation. So what we're going to do now is talk about upregulation. Upregulation means where the simplest way to think about it is that we are flooding the body with energy. So if you're looking to build more energy into the body, you want to upregulate. Learning will enhance, alertness will enhance, performance will enhance, and you'll feel an overall increase in energy. And that's what we want to do right now to get you guys awake and alive on a Sunday morning. We're going to do some upregulation breathing. So what you need to do now is find a space where you are comfortable and have a seat there. Make sure you are in a spot that you feel safe. You're not going to be disturbed. And we're going to go through some upregulation breathing. The first round is going to be pretty cruisy. The second round, you're going to take it up a little bit. This is like halfway through a workout, you're going to push on a little bit further. Round 3, we're going to go a bit deeper as well. So if you feel good in round 3, start to get more intense with your breathing. Round 1 looks like this. You're going to inhale for 3, and then exhale for 2, like so. So inhale for 3, exhale for 2 seconds. After 30 breaths, and I'll be counting, you're going to hold your breath at the top of the inhale for as long as you can. I'll cut you off after about a minute, but for as long as we can do that. And then we're going to rest. Then we'll go into round 2, same thing, but shorter. And round 3, the inhale is 1 second, the exhale is half a second. So round 3 will look something like that. The difference between nasal and mouth breathing, we're not going to concentrate on just yet. It's very important. We'll talk about it later. But for the time being, I just want you to breathe. I just want you to breathe through your nose. If your mouth opens up as well, that's okay. But see if you can breathe through both the nose and the mouth, okay? So to get started, let's just take a normal inhale and exhale. So inhale and exhale. And we're gonna start in 3, 2, 1, inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Let's continue. We're halfway. Inhale. Exhale. If you feel a little lightheaded, that's okay. Inhale.
Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. 5 more. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Okay. Inhale and hold. And hold. Close your eyes and just sit with that. Observe the space. Breathe out whenever you need to. But just see if you can sit and observe. And exhale. Well done. So you might have felt some stuff come up there. That's okay. You find baseline very quickly. You might find some increased blood flow. You might find the hands a bit tingly, the feet may be tingly. That's all part of it. This is the response we're going for. What we're going to do now. Round 2, 30 breaths, same thing. Faster inhale, shorter exhale. Big inhale, and shorter exhale. After that, we're holding our breath for as long as we can again. And I'll cut you off after a period of time. Okay, 3, 2, 1, inhale. Halfway. Ten more. Deep breath. And exhale. 9. And exhale. 8. Deep breath. And exhale. 7. And exhale. 6. Big inhale. And exhale. And 5. And exhale. And 4. And exhale. And 3. And exhale. And 2. And exhale. And 1. And hold. Holding here. Sitting with it. Observe. And let it go. Really well done. Great job. So we took it up a level there. Now last round, we're going to take it up a level further. This time, it's going to be a deep inhale from the belly coming from right down here, and then think about dumping the exhale, just a short exhale. Look something like this. Like so. So we're going to move at a pretty fast pace. Don't worry about the counting so much. This is more about you just getting into your state. We're going to go for around 30 breaths. I want you to go deep with the inhale, short with the exhale. See if you can push yourself here. 3, 2, 1, inhale. Halfway. 10 more. Deep. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Short exhale. 3, 2, 1. Inhale. Hold. Sit with it. Just observing, not reacting. And when you're ready, you can let it go. Back up your eyes. Just do a quick check-in with the body. Do you feel different? How do you feel different? Did that bring anything up? May have. That's okay. We're back to normal now. You might feel a little bit more acuity, a bit more energy, a bit more alive. And that's the purpose of what we're doing. So what did we do there? We flooded the body with oxygen, increased the surface area of the lungs. Pretty much you've got bronchioles and alveoli here. They've been expanded to let more in. You have purposely stimulated the sympathetic nervous system. You may have felt some adrenaline, maybe even some anxiety. It's okay. We've purposely stimulated the sympathetic nervous system, felt some adrenaline. What's interesting, after you stimulate the nervous system like this, you may feel a parasympathetic response. Depends on each person here. You might still feel that adrenaline flowing, but you might feel a good deal of relaxation afterwards. Production of adrenaline, acetylcholine, great for learning, and dopamine as well. You might feel pretty cool, pretty happy. It's a combination of stimulation and focus. How is this helpful? Well, this is different for every person. Depending on the makeup and what sort of response you get there, this can be really beneficial if you're, say, to do a presentation like I'm doing now. I sure feel a lot better. Just a bit nervous at the start. This can be great before exercise. If you think about it, you're flooding the body with oxygen, you're buffering fatigue. This has been studied, this technique, a little bit in athletics. It tends to buffer the fatigue that people feel. Also, you're going to feel that production of dopamine, that's our feel-good hormone, of adrenaline, which can be handy when we're going into a workout. That can really help if you are feeling yourself needing that extra pickup, rather than go for the pre-workout, go for the breath. And this is helpful for all of the things that we do. So I hope you enjoyed the exercise. I hope that you're switched on now, because we're going to get into some really interesting physiology stuff with Dr. Luke. And I'll be back with you later on to talk more about down regulation, which is as important as up regulation.
Enjoy, guys.
Hello, everyone. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty fired up after listening to Stephen. I think we had a moment during that breathing there. I was 1.5 meters away from Stephen, but I felt we were very intimately connected after that. It was really quite good. Don't know about you guys. I felt definitely some more warmth come into the hands and the feet, a little bit sweaty in my hands, which is very sympathetic nervous system. So that was kind of cool. And I found through the 3 rounds, Steve, I actually felt more in tune with the body. I felt a little bit more connected to the body. I felt where it was tight from training earlier this week. Some areas that were a little bit niggly kind of went away, and I had a more kind of acute awareness of the kind of, I guess, my pulse going through my body as well, which is pretty exciting. So anyway, we're going to get into my part now. So hopefully you guys are all fired up and we're ready to hit the ground running with this. I'm just going to come back into the prezzo. So this is me. It's time. So essentially, last time I did a workshop, I did get 2 bits of feedback, which I'm trying to amend this time. 1, you don't know how to use Zoom properly. That's fine. I've got Steve here. 2, your drawings are horrible. No special effects. Well, I've just shown you 1, so we're all already improving in terms of presentation stuff. So if anything goes wrong, Steve's on hand. That's fine. But hopefully, you guys are going to learn a little bit about the anatomy and physiology. Here's my About Us slide. So my name is Dr. Luke Bryan. If you haven't met me before, Luke is fine. First dot point, that's from Steve, actually. I didn't write that myself. So he thinks I'm a class guy. You'll find out over the next few minutes whether that's true or not. I'm the owner and principal osteopath at Movement by Design, the osteopathic clinic that sits within Fit Lab. If you've been in, you'll know we have a wonderful time in here. If you haven't, you haven't lived. So get down. We're still open at the moment. A few fancy letters there. They're my qualifications: Bachelor of Science, Clinical Sciences, Master of Health Sciences in Osteo. Prior to that, I had a business and marketing degree. I still have the debt for both, but they're coming in handy, so that's good. I met Steve through CrossFit, so we both still coach CrossFit to this day. I also coach Olympic lifting and powerlifting stuff, so I'm qualified through that. So a lot of the breathing stuff I do and I teach people is basically linked into performance during those lifts. I'm qualified across functional movement screen and SFMA, which is basically assessments for the body, and also FNOR, which means it's basically linked to functional neuro-orthopedic rehab. So how do we actually use the nervous system, like Stevie was talking about before, to drive classic orthopedic rehab, which will give us better results in terms of return to sport. Fun fact, I'm also published in the International Journal of Therapy and Rehabilitation. So that's pretty cool to have beside my name. That's what I did when I was doing my master's. So you'll find me somewhere if you search my name. Pretty cool paper, I think. Anyway, here's my objectives with you for today that we're going to go through. So I've got a few key parts we're going to get stuck into. Now, with anatomy and physiology, we want to keep it at a relatively basic and practical, understandable level. So when we go through the slides, I don't want you to get caught up on some of the fancy words. I just want to give you an overall understanding of how the system works. And I've also got within my slides a few key takeaway points. So after each section, you're going to have a key takeaway point. As long as you understand that, that's the point of what we're going through. We don't anticipate that you'll remember absolutely everything, particularly if you don't have a background in anatomy. So my objectives with you, we want to gain a basic understanding of how the cardiorespiratory system works. So cardiorespiratory, cardio refers to the heart, respiratory refers to the lungs. So how do those systems work together to keep you alive? Hence, breathing for life. How the brain and other parts of the body control breathing. This is where it's pretty cool. One thing that still blows my mind to this day is that breathing can be both voluntary and involuntary. That's kind of unique to the lungs. So heart rate isn't really a voluntary thing, that's an involuntary thing. Digestion, same thing. But with the lungs and breathing, you can actually control it and hence kind of tap into other areas of your body. So you can start to influence how the nervous system works, for example. Then we're going to take a look at key anatomy of the respiratory tract and its relationship with other body parts. So I've made a cool thing in Essential Anatomy. At least I think it's cool. Hopefully you guys are still here by the time I'm done there. We'll see via the logins if you've got excited or not. And then how dysfunctional breathing leads to issues elsewhere in the body. So just a couple of key clinical things I see when people have dysfunctional breathing and how that might impact other areas of the body. So it's a nice way to connect with, how breathing is really foundational in terms of, things in the musculoskeletal system as well. Got a few mobility drills we'll go through as well, just some simple ones that might help you as a precursor to some of the breathing drills if you're feeling a bit tight and if you feel like you can't get a full breath of air in. So they're the objectives. We'll go through those point by point. We're going to start really simply with the cardiorespiratory system. So again, cardio means heart. Respiratory is meaning the lungs essentially, so respiration or to breathe. Essentially, the cardiorespiratory system, we can think of it in three main pieces. So we have the lungs, hence the respiratory part. We also have the heart, that's the cardio part. And then we have cells. So these could be any cells throughout the body. Cells will basically need oxygen to complete their functions and to stay alive. So our purpose for breathing is to get oxygen towards the cell. So the way that works is we have oxygen outside the body. We breathe in. So as we did with the exercises with Steve before, we breathe the oxygen in. As an aside there, we don't just breathe in oxygen. Oxygen is about 20 or 21% of what we breathe in. Most of what we breathe in is actually nitrogen. We also breathe in a small portion of other gases as well. So some carbon dioxide will come in very small amounts. But the key thing we want to get out of the air we breathe in will be oxygen. So that'll come into the lungs during inspiration. So when we breathe in. Once we have the oxygen into the lungs, it's then going to travel via the heart. So as the air comes in, that's going to be picked up by blood vessels, which go back to the heart. You can think of the heart like a pump. So as the blood comes in, it goes through a couple of passages on the right-hand side of your screen there, and then it's going to go out into circulation. So it'll travel via the arterial system. So it goes via a number of channels. So it'll go firstly, mainly via the aorta, and then it goes down through a number of other vessels like arteries and arterioles. Just think of that like a narrowing river. So they get smaller and smaller until they get to the tissue. So once they get to the tissue, they're in what we call a capillary bed. So the way I like to think of a capillary bed is if you think these cells on the right here are, say, for example, a muscle. I like to think of a muscle like a packet of dry spaghetti. So if you're holding a packet of dry spaghetti, each bit of spaghetti is like a muscle fiber. The capillary that feeds that muscle fiber, imagine little red strings that go in and out of the bits of spaghetti. They're the capillaries. So they're really quite small. They'll go in, they'll feed each cell with the oxygen it needs to perform its function. So in the case of a muscle, you will require oxygen to contract the muscle. As a result of that, it's going to create some waste products. So once the oxygen is used, the tissue is going to be full of sort of metabolites. So carbon dioxide being one of the gases that we'll need to get rid of from the tissue, because in too big of an amount, the carbon dioxide will be toxic to the tissue. So that's the thing we need to get rid of. So what will happen on the other side of the capillary bed is the venous system. So the capillary bed will start as an arteriole, go into the arterial section of the capillary bed, then it will come out the venous side of the capillary bed and back to the heart via veins. We call this blood now deoxygenated blood. That means we've already given the tissue the oxygen, so now the blood is deoxygenated. So the pressure of carbon dioxide within that blood is now higher than the oxygen in that blood. There is still a portion of oxygen in that blood, but we say it's mainly deoxygenated. So back that goes to the heart. The heart's then going to pump that to the lungs, and that deoxygenated blood is then breathed out. So the carbon dioxide will come out of the blood back through the lung, and it will be breathed out into the atmosphere. Interestingly here, I want to kind of put a precursor on some things that Stevie's going to talk about a little bit later. We don't just breathe out carbon dioxide. That's the main thing we get rid of to achieve balance within the body. However, we're also breathing out oxygen too. So interestingly, if we breathe in about 20% or 21% of oxygen, depending on who you read, we're actually only using 4 to 5% of that as well within the system. So we're actually breathing out about 15% oxygen. So the interesting thing to have a think about is that perhaps breathing isn't so much driven for the need for oxygen, it's more driven by the need to achieve balance by getting rid of waste products such as carbon dioxide as well. So if I'm intaking 20% of oxygen, but I'm getting rid of 15% oxygen, if I needed more oxygen, it would make sense that 100% of the oxygen would be absorbed within the system. So just keep that in mind for when Steve comes back and does the CO2 tolerance test a little bit later on. Then you might ask, where does the carbon dioxide go and how the hell do I get more oxygen? Plants. So very underrated plants. So essentially the carbon dioxide will come out, it will go into plants. Plants use that as a fuel, and along with water and sunlight, their byproduct of their processes is oxygen. So that kind of completes the cycle. Let's have a closer look. By the way, I'm just pausing here. That finding this magnifying glass was absolutely the highlight of my life. This is a great transition. Maddie Crombie, if you're there, I hope you enjoyed that one. So we're going to take a closer look at the relationship between the lung and the heart. So it's all well and good to say, hey, oxygen comes into the lung and then it goes to the heart. But what happens in terms of kind of the gas exchange, which we're going to look at now? So if we have our lung, Stevie mentioned before a couple of things. So we look simply, hopefully you guys can see my arrow. Air is going to come down the airway here, the trachea, and then it's going to split each side. That's what we call bifurcating. So it splits in and goes into each lung, and then it splits into smaller branches here. So they call them the primary bronchus, the tertiary bronchus, and the segmental bronchus. So they basically split into smaller and smaller parts. Again, that analogy of like tributaries of a river. They get smaller and smaller and smaller. Then if we use our magnifying glass again to have a closer look at the functional unit of the lung, that is the alveoli, or a single one is called an alveolus. Now, alveolus is Greek, or Latin, I should say, for little cavity. Now, I've got some fun facts about the alveolus. This is actually a really, really cool structure. I think one thing when you learn a little bit about anatomy is it's like, okay, well, I breathe in air and it goes to the alveolus. That's all well and good. But I think we need to have an appreciation of how cool this structure actually is. So you can see here they've got one cut open in a cross section. It's kind of little sacs of air that are kind of bunched together like a bunch of grapes. Now, in terms of the size, to give you an appreciation of what we're working with here, each alveolus is 0.2 of a millimeter. So it is absolutely tiny. So if you think of a ruler and you've got a centimeter, there are 10 millimeters within that centimeter. And then we're talking 0.2 of one of those. So that is absolutely tiny. There are 480 million of those on average in the human lungs. So if we think about the size of the surface area of the lungs, for most people that's going to come to around 100 square meters. Now, if you are a member of FitLab here, fantastic. If you're not, get on board. It's great here. But if you think about the back room, the Olympic weightlifting room, that's 120 square meters roughly. So the field of your lung, or the surface area of your lung, is almost as big as that room if you just spread out all the alveoli along there too. So I think that's pretty incredible. So you'll see here as well in the picture, you'll see these blue things coming in. This is one of the veins as it comes in to the alveoli. It'll be deoxygenated. So you saw very carefully color-coded the arrows before. So this will be the deoxygenated one coming in. So it's going to be dropping off carbon dioxide. The little red ones here, they're going to be picking up oxygen and then taking it back to the heart. The interesting thing about how big the actual walls of these alveoli are, so we said there's 0.2 of a millimeter for one of them. The thickness of the wall, so just the wall of one alveoli, it's really quite tiny. It's 0.001 of a millimeter thick. So that is exceptionally small. That's the same size of the wall of the blood vessels that come in. The reason they're so fine is that allows really rapid gas exchange. So it allows deoxygenated blood to come in and allows the transfer of carbon dioxide and oxygen to occur within that structure. That's why we want it so thin. So we need to take care of these things. Whilst there's a lot of them, this is often where illness can strike in the alveoli. So if you've ever heard of pneumonia, essentially pneumonia is basically where fluid fills up in these, or some sort of mucus or pus or that sort of thing. So that's when you start to get these really kind of wet coughs, because these are full of fluid essentially. Things like smoking are not very good for these either. So we need to take care of these, because these are where gas exchange happens. If we don't have gas exchange, we don't have efficient breathing. This is just an extra little picture to show you in cartoon form what actually happens around the alveoli. So blood goes in, again, in like a bluey purple color. The carbon dioxide comes out. That changes the pressure within the alveoli, which will allow oxygen to come in, and then the blood will go into circulation. Here's the key takeaway point. A, cool pictures, very good, an improvement on the squat workshop. But the key takeaway point, oxygen enters the body via the lungs, so the alveoli is where the gas exchange happens. It's then pumped around the body via the heart to tissues so that they can carry out their functions, whatever they may be. The carbon dioxide is one of the waste products of those processes, and this is taken back to the lungs where it is breathed out into the atmosphere. So if you can get a basic understanding of how the system works as a whole, that's all we're asking. So pretty cool process, I think. All right, things are about to go up a level. We're going to start to talk about how the brain and some other parts of the body control breathing. So now we've got an understanding of how the cardiorespiratory system works. So air comes in, the heart does some stuff with it, it sends it to cells. But how is that whole process governed? And that's where things get pretty interesting. This is where we start to talk about voluntary and involuntary controls of breathing. So we're going to start with the brain. So this is the brain as a whole. The thing we want to have a look at that controls breathing is a certain part of that brain. So our magnifying glass comes out again. We want to look at this thing here with all the colors, because colors are pretty fancy. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the brainstem. So the brainstem is basically part of the primal brain, so the older part of the brain. It's very important in a number of things. So your primal brain, think about it as like a survival thing. It's responsible for drive. It's responsible for instinct. The part around the other side of the brain, kind of that area on the outside, it's not highlighted by the magnifying glass. That's more a modern brain, or what we call the prefrontal cortex. It's more responsible for problem solving, responsible for memory, impulse control, reasoning, and rational thought. So when we're dealing with breathing, we're dealing with the primal part of the brain. So if you reflect back on Steve's pyramid earlier, where he had breathing at the base of the pyramid, that kind of matches in nicely with how the brain develops. So if you don't have breathing, you can't perform some of those higher functions. Breathing is essential for life, therefore it's located in the primal brain, which was developed a hell of a lot earlier than the other parts of the brain. So this is our brainstem here. Now, within the brainstem, there are a couple of different structures. So this little circle that I've highlighted here, this is called the pontine center. So you don't have to remember that fancy term, but it's in the pons. Basically, think of this as head office. This is responsible for overall coordination of breathing. So the head office of breathing. There are another two little centers a little bit further down. So number 1 and number 2. Now these are part of the medullary center. Part number 1 is responsible for rhythmicity of breathing. So how rhythmic the breathing is. So the rate and the rhythm. Part 2 is responsible for the muscles of respiration. So they're the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, and we're going to show you how they contract a little bit later in the presentation. So again, part 1 is the pontine center. It's the coordinator, the head office. Also working in the head office, you have 2 other employees. One is responsible for rhythm. One is responsible for contraction of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. The contraction of these muscles kind of looks like this. So a very simple diagram. On the left here, you have air coming in. Now, that red little line here, hopefully you can see the arrow again, that's the diaphragm. That represents the diaphragm. So when you breathe in, that structure is going to push downwards and the ribs are going to flare out to the side. That's allowing inhalation to occur. So when the diaphragm comes down, that changes pressure within the thoracic cavity. That's what draws air in. Think about it like an upside down plunger. So when the diaphragm comes down, that's the plunger coming out. And on the right, when the plunger goes back in, that increases pressure in the cavity, and that's what forces the air out. So that's what part 2 of that system is in charge of. However, there are other things outside of the brainstem that contribute to breathing rate and rhythm. Let's have a look at those. First one, coming in from the side. This is the brain itself. So this is the higher centers of the brain. These are responsible for voluntary control. So this is the part of your brain, this little curly bit up here, that's responsible for your thought and your reasoning and your consideration and your judgment. It is not considered primal. This has developed over time for higher function. This is what makes humans unique. So basically within that higher center of the brain, it's also linked to other things. It's linked to pain, it's linked to emotion, it's linked to temperature, amongst other things. So they will all feed into your breathing rate. So think about pain, for example. When you're in pain, your respiratory rate will go up. That's going to be a function of one of the higher centers of the brain. If you're emotional, you might be breathing more. So they're all going to come down and give feedback to the head office. So messages from the higher centers of the brain feed into the brainstem, which help it make decisions. So think of it like another department or another employee. It's going to feed information to head office. Head office is going to use that information, and it's going to use that information to make decisions on what the diaphragm does and how much air to come in and how much air to come out. Another department or employee we'll have a look at is the heart. So within the heart, there are a couple of receptors. These receptors are called chemoreceptors. So when you hear the word chemo refers to chemical. Receptor refers to recepting or to pick things up. Think of TV reception, it's picking up a signal. So these two receptors, they basically sit in different parts of the heart. They're responsible for picking up oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH balance. So they're basically like a checkpoint. So they're always feeding back information into the brainstem again, saying, okay, this is your level of carbon dioxide, this is your level of oxygen at the moment, this is your pH balance in the blood. I want you to use that information to make a decision on what you need to do with your breathing. So there's two of them. They sit in these little arch things up here at the top of the heart. So that's where the receptors are. Third one, brainstem itself. It works exactly like the heart. So this is like another internal check within the brain itself. It does exactly the same thing, monitors oxygen, pH, and carbon dioxide, and provides feedback again into the head office to help make decisions. Muscles and joints. I just couldn't avoid putting this guy in. He's magnificent. So muscles and joints will also provide feedback into the brain to regulate breathing. So there are receptors within the body that pick up how muscles and joints are moving. And if they're moving more vigorously, that's going to be a signal to the brainstem to increase respiratory output, because we need more oxygen to go to the muscle so the muscle can keep doing its work and it can get rid of its waste products. So that feeds in as well. And the last one is the lungs. So the lungs have a couple of receptors that will feed back into the brainstem to help regulate its breathing. So if you think about all the other things that have contributed, or all the other departments, a lot of them are being saying, you know, increased breathing will get the lungs working a little bit harder. But the lungs have its own system, which basically tells the brainstem if it's working too hard or whether, you know, something else needs to be done. So there are two main receptors within the lung. One's an irritant receptor, so it picks up things that are irritating. So think about if you needed to cough, for example, if there was some sort of pathogen coming into your lungs or some sort of dust. Cold is another irritant. So when cold comes in, you'll increase your respiratory rate as well. There are also stretch receptors within the lung. So it feeds back, all right, my lung's overstretching, we need to calm this thing down as well. So there's like a little backstop within the lung itself to control breathing. So pretty cool, I think, overall. So we've got the brain, again, up on the top left here. The brainstem is the primal part of the brain, which is in control of most of the breathing. It has two centers. One is the pontine center. It's the head office. It does coordination of breathing. The second one is the medullary center. It has two inputs within it. One's for rhythm, one's for the muscle contraction. Then we go across to the right. This is what it will actually do. It activates the diaphragm to go down and the intercostals to go out to allow air exchange with the environment. But within that, you have other departments. So you have the brain, you have the heart, you have the brainstem backup system, you have muscles and joints, and you have lung receptors, all of which act as different departments, all of which feed back information to the brainstem for the head office to make better decisions about what we need to do with breathing. This is a cool video. I'm going to show you this. So we talked about breathing and how it works in terms of the diaphragm moving down. For some of you, you might not have seen the diaphragm. So I'm just going to show a quick little video here so you can see it move. Now this is an avatar I've created of Steve Hennessy. As you can see here, incredible pecs, biceps, and abdominals. So I couldn't fit his head in, but it's him, I promise. Anyway, you can see inside the rib cage. And when you breathe, your rib cage moves. Not a lot of people realize that the rib cage is actually mobile. So to keep a mobile rib cage is stupidly important for breathing. So you can see here when the lungs expand and contract, side on, that red thing at the bottom is your diaphragm. It moves down like that plunger, and then the reverse plunger where it pushes back up during relaxation to force air out of the lungs. So that's how the diaphragm works. So it moves up and down, which changes pressure gradients, which then will create airflow throughout the lungs. All right, pretty heavy slide there, but here's your key points that I want you to take away. The brainstem's your head office where breathing is controlled. It controls rhythm and muscular contraction of the diaphragm and the intercostals, which allow air in. The brainstem receives input from other areas of the body. Think different departments sending information to the head office for decision making. These help modulate rhythm of breathing. These are the heart, the brainstem, the higher centers of the brain, the muscles and joints, and the lungs themselves. That's all we need to remember there. So pretty cool how we can have some voluntary control over the breath as well as some automatic things that you don't need to worry about. All right, you guys ready to do some anatomy of the respiratory tract? I sure am, because I've created something special for you. Let me just quickly change over here. I'm going to stop our share. This is where Steve and Hennessy might come in handy. Oh no, we go down here. Steve, take a seat. I got this.
Back away.
Don't worry. All right. I nailed it. This is a first. Eat that. I'm pretty good at Zoom now, aren't I? Yeah, going all right. Anyway, we're going to have a quick look at the anatomy. This is a cool little program. If you haven't seen this before, this is called Essential Anatomy. It's really cool if you're a visual person. I found this, my uni degree was 5 years. For 3 of those years, I did anatomy, and the last 2 you dissect a body, which is also pretty weird but cool. This program would have come in handy during the first 3 years. I found it in the last week of my 3rd year. It broke my heart. I was reading from textbooks and doing palm cards and things to try and remember stuff. And it was a mess. So get this, it's awesome. Anyway, so if we have a little look at something I've created here earlier, this will give you an appreciation for where air travels, a better look at the diaphragm, and then some connections to what happens when you're not breathing effectively. So up here, what I've got highlighted is the nasal cavity. So this here is where your nose would sit if we had skin on there. On one side here, I've got just the bone. These things are called the nasal concha. There are 3 of them that sit in the nose. And these are responsible for slowing air down and allowing it to kind of moisten and humidify. It also does that via the mucus. So I've left the mucus on the other side here. That will actually help that humidification process. You'll see if I spin it around, I've also opened up the mouth. I've got rid of his teeth here. So you can see that air can travel through the mouth here or the nose here. But if we look in the back of the skull, you'll see they end up in the same place anyway. So they actually go down the same hole. So if we kind of switch it here a little bit, you'll see there we've got the trachea, which I've just highlighted. So air will end up coming down this way. And then it will follow down. And we see it comes down into the lungs. Now, the lung on this side here that I've got highlighted, that's kind of the regular lung. This other one on the other side, I've just kind of faded some stuff out. So if we zoom in here, you'll see the heart sits tucked in between the lungs. So this thing here, this is the heart. These are the arteries and the veins that are exiting through the heart. They'll eventually end up in the lung. And you can see these pink things here. These are little alveoli towards the end. So this is where the air actually comes down the trachea, goes in through the bronchi, then all of a sudden it ends up in these little alveoli that we looked at before. And you'll see the intimate relationship between the arteries in red and the veins in blue that are basically doing that kind of gas exchange process to allow oxygen to go through the body and carbon dioxide to go out. So even cooler than that, I think, is underneath is where the diaphragm is. So I'm just going to scoot under here so you can see this. So this is an impressive piece of machinery. So what I've highlighted here is the diaphragm. You can see it's a big dome-shaped thing. It's 360 degrees, so it covers right around your body. It attaches to the rib cage, it attaches to the sternum, along with another couple of areas, but it's quite a big structure. So if you were to cut yourself in half right down the middle and flip yourself on your side, please don't do that. That's where you'll see this thin sheet of muscle called the diaphragm, and it's incredibly important. Within the diaphragm, there are a couple of different holes as well. They call them hiatuses, where things come through. So this thing I've just highlighted here, this is your stomach. Steve mentioned earlier digestion. The breathing and the diaphragm movement is critical to digestion. So you can see up here where the esophagus would come through, and then also it comes down into the stomach. So basically, as the diaphragm comes down and contracts, we basically see that close up. That's to prevent reflux. So if there's a problem here and there's a tightness here, that's going to end in digestion problems. So often you see people who have had long-term GORD or gastroesophageal reflux disease might actually have a problem breathing or might benefit from some breathing exercises to allow the diaphragm to work as it should. Next door to that, we've got what they call the cavale opening. So that blue thing there, that's part of the venous system that comes back to the heart. That's the vena cava. So the vena cava is responsible for draining blood and waste products back to the heart, which then take it to the lungs and get rid of the waste products we don't need. That works in opposition to the opening where the esophagus comes through. So as your diaphragm is going down, that will open. As it comes up, it will close. So it creates a pumping effect. So the movement of the diaphragm is incredibly important in terms of drainage. Your veins don't work like your arteries. So your artery is worked by a pressure system, which is your pulse. That pulse will be pushing things around the body. The veins work like a valve system. So we actually need muscular contraction to push fluid through those valves, or else we end up with problems. So if you get people with a lot of swelling in their feet or their lower bodies, for example, perhaps their pumping system through the diaphragm isn't working as effectively as it could. The other one we've got here at the back doesn't really influence too much of what happens here, but that one there is basically, that's where the aorta goes. That's the aortic hiatus. So the red thing is where blood will come out. So it's coming down that way to the lower limb. The blue thing, that's where it's going back up to the heart. So you can see three very important openings, and you can see how dysfunction of this muscle could be directly related to stomach problems or reflux, to drainage problems, or to issues with arterial supply to the lower body as well. Interestingly, anatomically as well, as we scan down, there are a couple of muscles that link directly into the diaphragm. So on this side here, on the right side of the body in question, we've got the QL muscle. We're going to do a little stretch on this shortly. It creates a little ligament called the arcuate ligament. It's one of the arcuates, the other one's with the psoas, which I'll show you in a sec. But the QL is in the low back. So a lot of people with low back pain will have a tight QL. That is linked via ligament and fascia to the diaphragm. So arguably, tightness there might create dysfunction at the diaphragm as well. The jury's out study-wise on that. It's a pretty hard one to study, but theoretically that makes sense, right? If something that connects to another thing is tight, it's going to be off-putting and create some dysfunction. Same is true on the other side. The big hip flexor, your psoas, which sits connected to your spine, and you can see up here, there's another ligament. One of the other arcuate ligaments, the medial one. So if you have tight hip flexors, for example, that can have problems with the diaphragm and its function, so how it moves up and down. So now we're starting to get this kind of idea of, all right, we've got some other muscles around the diaphragm which are pretty important, connect directly to it. So it kind of links back to one of the primary tenets of osteopathy, which I'm involved in, is the body works like a unit. So if one thing is off, the whole system is off. So we actually need to pay some attention to these things in order to get the diaphragm moving a little bit better. Off to the side here, I'm just highlighting the intercostals. I feel like I'm on a bus tour. Off to the side here, if you look out your left window, we have the intercostals. So these are the ones that bring the rib cage up and out. So they're going to kind of push the rib cage up and out that way to create some more volume. Now, two quick little clinical things I want to show to you in terms of what might happen when your breathing is dysfunctional. If your breathing is dysfunctional through your primary muscles of respiration, then you might use your accessory muscles of respiration. So to put that simply, the muscle I've got highlighted there, they're your intercostals. And the other one, the diaphragm, which we just looked at here, now highlighted, they're primary muscles of respiration, meaning their primary function is to help you breathe. There are other muscles in the body that also attach to the rib cage and can be used for breathing, but their primary function isn't necessarily that. One such thing is your pec minor. If you've been to the clinic, I've probably poked this with your consent, and it's not very pleasant on a lot of people. It can be for a number of reasons outside breathing as well, but you can see your pec minor attaches to your rib cage. So similar to the intercostals, it's going to bring the rib cage up and out. So it can kind of do a similar function. Problem with that is it also attaches to the shoulder blade here. So that can create problems pulling the shoulder blade forward. If that happens, you end up with a recipe for disaster at the shoulder. So this is where we start to see things like labral tears, like impingements of the shoulder, like simple loss of range of movement through the shoulder. So if you're a chest breather, for example, you breathe heavily through your chest rather than the tummy that Steve was mentioning before, then this might be a problem for you. And this just might be a symptom of poor breathing rather than anything else. Another muscle we'll have a quick look at are your scalenes. So I put 2 of them on here. See if we zoom in. That's your front one, and that's your middle one. There's also one at the back that's not included. These also move the rib cage. So the direction of pull, they're going to pull the rib cage up because they attach to the first rib. So if they pull the rib cage up, that will help get more air in, and that's a good thing. However, it's not their primary role. You can see how small these muscles are compared to the diaphragm and the intercostals. The more efficient way to breathe is to use your intercostals and your diaphragm. If you're using these tiny little muscles, they get tight. Problem when they get tight is that big yellow bunch of things that comes out of your neck there, that's your brachial plexus. Now that's pretty important. That filters down your arm. So I've got the top of it there. I'm just going to draw on here for you. Out of the neck, they come between those muscles, also under the pec, interestingly, and end up going down your arms. So often we'll get people presenting in the clinic here and they'll say, I've got pins and needles in my fingers. And that could be anywhere along the pathway of the nerve. But clinically, what I often see is that person's got an exceptionally tight neck. That tight neck is the scalenes tightening, which is compressing the nerve. If a nerve is compressed, that causes pins and needles. So it's all well and good to say the scalenes are tight, that's what's causing your symptoms. But if you release those scalenes and then you don't have a proper breathing technique, guess what tightens up again? The scalenes. And so that will mean pins and needles will probably come back over a period of time. So we're looking at hopefully fixing the problem rather than just the symptom. And I think breathing can go a long way towards helping with that. So hopefully that was an interesting little anatomy adventure. Now let me get out of here. Stevie says I've got this. I'm not so sure at the moment. No, I'm pivoting his head, Stephen. No, I've got it. Hang on. Nailed it.
Yeah.
Ah,
Okay.
give me a thumbs up there, right? That was pretty good, wasn't it? Yeah. Andreas is loving it down there. Beautiful. All right. Now I've got to figure out what I was doing again.
Go share.
Share screen. Steve's back again, everyone.
Yeah.
Say hi to Steve while he's here. All right. You go from here. I just got too excited. I'm too pumped up at the moment. There we go. All right. Anatomy of the respiratory tract complete. So we're getting closer to the end of my section. You get handsome Steve Hennessy back in a sec. Don't worry, he's coming back and he's got some more good stuff for you. So little few takeaway points. I've just shown you lots of things. Hopefully you've got some ideas of how breathing might influence other areas of the body. Here's key takeaways. Nasal breathing has 3 key benefits. So we went through a few little things on the nose and how it works. The benefit of breathing through your nose where those little concha are, or the mucus is it's going to moisten and humidify the air for us. That's a good thing because like we said, when the air goes down before and it's cold, that's problematic for the lung to use. So to be able to moisten and humidify air as it comes in is a great purpose of nasal breathing. The nose also acts as a filter. So when you breathe in, you have nose hairs. The nose hairs act as a filter to stop dirt and dust and all sorts of things getting in. Don't wax your nose hair. It's important. 3, didn't go through this, but we'll go through it now. It vasodilates and bronchodilates. So fancy words, don't get too worried about it. Vasodilates. Vaso refers to vessel. Dilate refers to making bigger. So when you breathe through your nose, you actually intake nitric oxide. The job of that is to increase the diameter of the vessels. It also bronchodilates. So if you're a little bit savvy in this prezzo, you'll notice that there are bronchi within the lungs, which are those pipes after the trachea. They dilate, so they become bigger. So it makes the air freer to travel down the pathway, and it makes the vessels wider to carry the blood. So that's very important, those 3 little points there. The diaphragm and the intercostals contract to create more volume in the cavity of the thorax. That draws the air into the lungs via its pressure gradient. So diaphragm's important there. Few little dysfunctions. So we went through a couple. There's a little bit of research I'm going to run you through now, which is pretty cool, particularly if you're really into your training and you get low back pain. I'm going to blow your mind. So dysfunctional breathing can lead to problems elsewhere in the body due to the anatomical relationships that exist. Some of these are low back pain. So we touched on that before.
bit of research. Hodges and Janssens, they said if breathing demand increases, the role of your diaphragm in low back stability declines. Now, we talked about the diaphragm like a plunger before. So if you create a plunger that opens up the thorax, you're actually compressing the low back, which is good. That creates stability. If your diaphragm isn't working well, the role of the diaphragm as a stabilizer decreases. So think about the diaphragm's role as primarily, or 80% of the role of the diaphragm is inspiration to breathe in. The other 20% refers to stability amongst a few other things. So if your diaphragm's not working, low back stability decreases. If demand on one role of the diaphragm increases, it abolishes the other. So for example, if you're breathing heavy, you're decreasing your lower back stability. Now that has implications for your workouts. So I often hear in clinic, I'm really good with my Olympic lifting when I'm lifting heavy, but when I do it in WODs, my back hurts. Why is that? Because the weight's lower, so it should be easier. Well, not necessarily. So if your diaphragm works like a plunger to create stability in the low back, if it's busy keeping you alive by breathing, it doesn't really care how stable your low back is. If you're dead with a stable low back, that's really not helpful. You need to be alive. So the diaphragm's going to play its primary role in breathing, but it takes away from its low back stability. So when you're in workouts that require extra breath, like your metcons and things, that's where low back stability becomes problematic. So you as a responsible adult should be talking to the coaches about that and letting them know that you do have problems. You change your workout to decrease the load or remove the activity and do more body weight stuff when it's high heart rate, high respiratory rate. Keep the heavy stuff when your diaphragm can work as a stabilizer. Another two little findings on that low back pain thing. Patients with low back pain, they move their diaphragms half less than people with no back pain. So you saw the diaphragm come down before. If you've got back pain, your diaphragm might only be moving half of that range. So again, less stability. So exercises like Stevie's just given you, super beneficial for low back. So make sure you're breathing with your diaphragm. The last one was further or insufficient or uncoordinated diaphragm breathing leads to overactivity of your spinal stabilizers. So low back starts to work overtime when your diaphragm's not working very hard. One other key thing, just before closing off this section and getting into the stretching, is the cardiac side of things as well. So in the research, they basically found your diaphragm breathing improved markers such as blood pressure. That kind of makes sense because you're going to increase the diameter from breathing through your nose of the blood vessels. If there's more diameter, there'll be less pressure, hence blood pressure comes down. So that's fairly logical. Heart rate also comes down because your system's more efficient. For those with the Whoop device, which is very popular, it will increase your HRV. So HRV, for those who don't know, is heart rate variability. Basically, it's got an inverse relationship typically to your heart rate. So the longer time you've got between heartbeats, the more variable your heart rate variability will be, which is a good thing because that's linked to more recovery and performance. So exercises like diaphragmatic breathing are very important in terms of your recovery capacity as well. Mobility to help your breathing. Who wants to do some mobility exercises? I do, and Steve's coming over to help because I'm too fired up at the moment. I don't know how to work the system yet set up. Yeah. Thought you were good at Zoom, Steve.
Yeah, I thought I was too.
Go stop share screen. You ready now? Boom. I did it, everyone. That's great. I told Steve how to use Zoom. That was great, wasn't it? All right. So we're going to go through 3 stretches, fairly basic stretches. If you've been to my mobility classes before, you've probably seen at least 2 of these, but now when you do them, you can start to think about them in the context of breathing. So if you're having problems breathing, you do these exercises. So the first one is a diaphragm release. This is not comfortable for most people. So keep that in mind. It's not that it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it causes a little bit of itchiness under the rib cage. So if I think about my rib cage, if you have a play around with your tummies, and I can see you all on the screen as well, so I know if you're doing it or not. So have a play around. You'll feel your rib cage, the bottom of your rib cage and the bottom of your sternum. Now, you've all probably been doing a lot of sit-ups at home, so your abs are going to be pretty big and they're going to be in the way in the middle here. Where we want to go is slightly outside of that. That gets away from where the abs are. What we're actually going to do with the hand is actually going to be pushing upwards into the diaphragm, which sits under that rib cage. When you do this, we don't want it to be too effortful with the hands. We actually want to rest the hands on the thighs, and that's going to create a fulcrum that's going to drive my fingers up into my rib cage. So I'm going to show you this first, and then I'll take you guys through, and I want you to do it along with me. So basically, steady yourself with a fairly wide stance, just so you've got some stability. Fingers face up, underneath the bottom of the diaphragm here, and hooking up and around the rib cage that way. So again, up and around here. What I'm then going to do is lean down. So see, if I lean down, my wrists are now sitting on my thighs. So I don't actually have to be effortful in pushing up. I just let the pressure of my body coming over my thighs, let my fingers slip into the diaphragm. From here, I feel a really crappy feeling, and I'm going to breathe into that. So I'm going to breathe through my nose, into my belly, and then out. When I breathe out, I'm sinking my torso further forward over the top. So we're going to go through 10 breaths together of that, just so you guys can get a feel. So follow along. Feet are coming a little bit wider. Hands on the bottom of your rib cage, just outside your massive six pack. It's probably a little bit smaller than Steve's, but it's still good. Hook under the ribs. Lean forward. Make sure your wrists are on your thighs. And just lean forward until you feel a discomforting feeling around the rib cage. From here, I want you to breathe in through your nose. When you breathe out through your mouth, lean a little bit further forward. We're going to go through 10 breaths. Again, hooking around the rib cage. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, looking progressively sadder. 7, 8, 9, and 10. And now stand on up, shake your head in disgust, and take a big breath into your belly again. I can feel mine expand quite a lot more, so hopefully that happens with you. If that was incredibly uncomfortable, that probably means the diaphragm is tight. If the diaphragm is tight, it doesn't contract as well. So muscles work with what we call a length-tension relationship. So if a muscle is at its resting length, say this, it will contract really well. If it is too long or too short, it doesn't contract as well. So if you're coming up here and that's really tight, one of the potential things you're dealing with is a tight diaphragm. So you'll have to do that a number of times, almost every second day, just to kind of loosen it up. Feel free to play around the rib cage as well and find some other icky areas. So that's number 1. Number 2, I'll show you on the stool. So get a chair. If you've got a chair, that's awesome. Got a massage table, even better. But if you don't have one of those, no chair will do. If you've been in my mobility class, this is what we call the QL stretch. So this is a Kit Lachlan special. Again, don't freak out if you forget this, because I've given you links to all 3 stretches we're doing. This one stretches low back, but also as you lean across, it opens up your intercostals on this side. It opens up your lat, which also attaches to the ribs. And as you come across, you're going to feel a massive stretch through that whole kind of system. We're then going to breathe in through this side of the body. So we're trying to expand it up and out that way. So the way it works in setup, I'll show you first. One hand comes underneath. So we're going to put the right hand underneath and grab hold of the chair. You're going to lean your body off to the side this way. Arm comes up over the top. You'll notice I'm trying to keep my torso straight. So I'm not rotating my torso that way, nor am I letting my arm be lazy like that. I want to come straight to the side. I want to actively reach, and then I'm going to lean across. From here, I use my breathing. So in through my nose, out through my mouth. I'm going to hang out here for a few short breaths and repeat. When you come out of it, we're going to roll forward out of it that way. So follow along. So feet wide apart. Hook underneath with the right hand. Lean across. You'll feel that pull in your low back. Arm comes up and across, opening up the rib cage and the intercostals. Nice outstretched arm, no bent elbows. We don't want flaccid, we want taut. Alright, come that way, find that stretch, breathe in through your nose and out. Lean across to the side, you'll feel that pull through the QL. That's awesome, because again, that attaches to the diaphragm, so pretty crucial. And again, breathe in. Just in your own time, you're going to go through sort of 5 to 10 breaths, just depending how comfortable you are here. Some people find this a little bit challenging. I did it first. And once you've got through 10, you roll forward and out. Let's try left. Left hand goes under. Lean off to the left. Back into the low back. Arm up over the top. No flaccid elbows, no one likes those. Lean to the side. Reach. This one's tighter for me. Breathe in through the nose, into the side of the body. And on the exhale, lean across. Again, 10 breaths. In through nose, out through mouth, and reach. Again, 5 to 10, just depending on where you're comfortable. And when you are ready, roll forward and out. So that's 2. So stretch number 1, diaphragm. Stretch number 2, QL, intercostals, lat, lots of stuff. So you've got a tight low back, that is an absolute banger. So try and do that most days. I'd probably repeat that sort of 3 to 5 times. So you go left, then right. That's 1 set. Repeat again, left, then right, 2 sets. And you might come back in between sets, release that diaphragm. Make it kind of like a workout. The last one is for the neck. So we looked at the scalenes before. There's structures that sit in through here. Again, that's where that little nerve plexus is. So they sit like an upside down triangle. So they sit like that. You'll need to lay down for this one. So I'm going to show you first what it looks like on the table here. You're going to have bent legs. You're going to grab hold of your shin like this. This is going to be like kind of the position you're going to start to push away with your leg. So it's going to bring your arm down a little bit. Other leg can go wherever you like, so just let it relax. Your head's going to be down, but it's going to be side bent to the left. Your left hand comes over the top. What I'm going to do with this leg is I'm going to be pushing it away that way, but my hand's going to be connected to my leg, so it's not going to go as far. So as I do that, cleverly, that pulls the shoulder down, which pulls the rib cage down, and you should start to feel a stretch in the side of the neck here. Other area you can feel it is the bicep. If you've been doing a sneaky bicep program at home, you might get that, and that's fine. Otherwise, just side bend your head a bit. Then we're going to contract and relax. So when I say contract and relax, when I say contract, we're going to shrug the shoulder upwards, but because you're holding the shin, that doesn't move. So it's a light shrug with about 20 or 30% effort, and then I'll say relax. When you relax, you stop shrugging, and you push the foot out a millimetre or 2 further as if it's going that way. Now, if you have problems grabbing the shin, you can get a towel and wrap it around and hold the towel, or you can hook into the back of your shoe with a couple of fingers, and that will often help as well. So join me on the ground. I'll lead you through it. Bend your right knee. Grab your right shin with your right hand. Bend your head to the left. Hold your head steady with the left hand, so it's like a block. And then shift your foot down and away from you until you feel a pull in the neck or in the bicep is fine if you're tight there. So this is the start position. Now I want you to shrug up lightly with your right arm, just lightly. Big breath. When you breathe out, relax. Push your foot a couple of millimetres away from you. That'll wind up the stretch a bit more. And again, shrug up. Big breath. Breathe out, relax, push away. If that's pretty intense, I want you to stay there. If you're in the zone, you want to go for it, let's do it. Shrug up. Big breath. Breathe out, relax. Shimmy away a bit. Mother of pearl, we're on here. Few breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. And slowly let go of your shin. Roll your head back to center. Let's repeat left. Last one. Bend your left leg. Your right leg is straight. Your left hand reaches down to grab your shin on the back of your shoe. Bend your head off to the right side. The right hand comes over the top to support. and then push your foot away until you feel a pull in the neck. Or again, down the arm, just means you're tight there. Let's begin. So shrug up. Deep breath. Breathe and relax. Shift your foot. And again, shrug up. Deep breath. Breathe and relax. Push your foot away a millimetre or two if you can and wind it up. This one is also grotesque for me. Homework. Again, shrug up. Deep breath. Breathe out, relax. Push your foot away if you can. If you're at end range, just hang out there. Couple of breaths through the nose. And slowly let go of your shin. And let go of your head. And in your own time, sit on up. So, some of you may have found those stretches harder than others. Some of you may have felt fantastic. Either way, that's fine. Prioritise the stretches that you get the most bang for buck for. There are half a dozen other stretches that might help you. I think the way I would approach that, if I were doing it, I would do like a 3-round thing, kind of like a lot of you guys do your workouts. So you might do 3 rounds at a time. So you might do a diaphragm release for 10 breaths. Then you might go into a QL stretch at each side for maybe about a minute or so. Then you go into the scaling stretch laying down for a minute or so each side. That's 1 round. You might throw that in 3 times. So that might be your mobility workout for breathing. Then you might use that kind of increased range within your thorax to take advantage of some of the breathing skills that Steve's about to take you through. So that's it for me. I'll be back later for questions and things, but I'll miss your faces until then.
Beautiful. All right, team, I want you to take 3 deep breaths through your nose and out through your nose. In the meantime, we'll get back to our presentation. Okay. Screen. All right, guys, how good was that? That was deep and amazing, especially with those stretches at the end. Hope you're feeling a bit looser, a bit lighter, because that's really where we're heading for the rest of the session.
I had a great time.
You're feeling good. Yeah, so am I. Now, circling back to what LB spoke about with the physiology stuff. So one thing we need to know before we head into the down regulation is just what happens with the oxygen and CO2. So oxygen, we breathe that in. That's going to attach to the red blood cells, and then that's going to go to the tissues and then out through CO2. But this process, that's the simplest version of the process. The process is dependent on CO2. And CO2 often gets a bad rap, maybe because of carbon emissions and that sort of thing. But CO2 is very important for oxygen delivery and for breathing in general. So oxygen and CO2 have like a love story. They work together very, very well. And if I was to summarize CO2 in its effect, it would be that in order to breathe efficiently and to be healthy, you need to be able to tolerate CO2. So you need to be able to deal with CO2 in the system, okay? So for us to properly absorb the oxygen and make use of it, we need to have adequate CO2 in the system. A lot of people think it's like oxygen, got to get all of that in, got to get all the CO2 out. That's not it at all. That in fact leads into overbreathing. And that tends to be the biggest problem with people's breathing is they overbreathe. They take in, they perceive CO2 as somewhat of a threat, and that leads to you overbreathing. If you imagine someone who is anxious or is stressed, they're going to be breathing quite a bit. If you imagine someone who's more relaxed, it's something like, and they're okay with some breath holds. They're going to be breathing maybe 3-6 times a minute. Someone who's more stressed will be breathing maybe 15 times a minute. So the more tolerant we are to CO2, the better. So what happens with CO2? CO2 will trigger the body into taking an inhale. So I'm going to take an inhale here. At that point, just before then, my body said, hey, we've got some CO2 buildup. We need to get rid of it. That's why I'm taking that inhale. Okay. But what happens? The body is very sensitive. What happens if it perceives CO2 as a threat all of the time? That's when we see things like overbreathing. And that's when we see things like breathing through the mouth. And they're the main problems with breathing, guys. We breathe too much and we mouth breathe. So we're over breathing because we see CO2 as a threat, and we mouth breathe because that's just inefficient breathing. So in order to become better breathers and healthier and definitely fitter in the gym, we're going to get into performance pretty quickly. The breathing needs to happen mostly through the nose, and we want to be taking less breaths. We want to see CO2 as our friend. So what we're going to do now is something called a BOLT, or it's called a BOLT score. This is the blood oxygen level test designed by Patrick McEwen and from Oxygen Advantage. This is designed to see how tolerant you are to CO2. Okay, so if you are very, very tolerant to CO2, generally the fitter and healthier and better breather you are. If you are less tolerant, it means you're probably new to the BOLT test, and we can improve on our breathing scores. So what you need for this one is, and I know you've all got this nearby, your phone. If you don't have a phone, stopwatch, something that can measure our time. So you're going to pull your phone out, you're going to pull it to the clock, our stopwatch, and what we're going to do to start off with is take a breath in and then a breath out. I'm just going to demonstrate how it's done. At the end of the exhale, I'm going to hit start, and I'm holding my breath. I want you to cover your nose as well so you don't inhale. I'm measuring how long I can hold my breath for at the bottom of the exhale. And I need to breathe in again. It's important to know that the BOLT test is not a score for how long you can hold your breath, like until you go blue in the face. The time stops when you need to breathe, when you feel a stress signal to the brain, or when you feel an involuntary contraction. An involuntary contraction can be this, like that, or something like that, and many of you will feel that. That's when you stop your score. Okay, it's not a breath hold. It's not, you're not going to PR your BOLT score. This is just an indication to see where you're at. Okay, so let's do this together. Phone's out. Inhale through your nose. Exhale through your nose. Whenever you're holding, it's when the time starts. Okay. So if you're still going, go ahead until you can next take that breath in. And really on average there, most people are going to get around the 20-second mark for their first time. Anything in sub 20 seconds is not optimal. It doesn't mean you can't change anything. It just means we've got some space for improvement. 20 to 30 is average for an exercising individual. If you're exercising and you're pretty fit and you got below 20 seconds, that's actually exciting. That's to say, hey, we're not even breathing. We're pretty intolerant to CO2. We can get more tolerant to CO2 through breathing properly, and that's going to enhance our aerobic capacity. 30 to 40 seconds, good for someone exercising, and 40 plus is someone optimal. This is the 400 meter winner from two Olympics. It was 2004, 2008, classic nasal breather. And she'd done a lot of breath training. See how relaxed she is there as well. What we're going to do now, this is the fun part. This is how we're going to improve our BOLT score just with one exercise. We're going to go back to our upregulation activity. So this is when we're doing the intense breathing. And we're going to take a big inhale in and a short exhale out. Like so. But I want you to see if you can go through your nose this time. Okay, so see if we can shut off the mouth and only go through your nose. So circling back, this was a up-regulation activity. You've got 30 sets, one big inhale and one short exhale. I'll get you to get settled for this one as well. Alrighty. So, how do you sit? And find that space that you're comfortable in. This one's only going through the nose, guys, as best as you can through the nose, and breathing forward. We're going to inhale and then exhale short. So 3, 2, 1, big inhale. Halfway. Ten more. 5, 3, 2, 1, and inhale, and exhale, relax. Now hold the exhale, set your timer again, and you're holding for as long as possible. Close your eyes, sit with it. Cover your nose. Okay. If you're still going, keep going. It's very common for something like that to increase your Bolt score by sometimes double. You might go from 20 seconds to 30 seconds, or 20 seconds to 40 seconds. And that's just one way that we can get better at being more tolerant to CO2. So if you think about what we need in a workout, where we need to be more tolerant to CO2, so we're breathing more regularly, something like that is amazing to do before you work out to buffer your fatigue. As a guide with breathing and performance, this is my girl again. Look at that. Isn't that fantastic? Mouth breathing, nasal breathing. Mouth breathing, nasal breathing. The whole way. It's incredible. So ultimately, we want to get to a point where we're nasal breathing for all of our activities. Definitely through our normal life, throughout the day. Walking is a great time to practice nasal breathing. Mouth breathing, we want to save that for the points where we really need to, like a really high intensity workout when the nasal breathing runs out. So at the lower intensity exercise, things like yoga, things like walking, even steady state cardio, nasal breathing only. There's so many benefits to this. Medium intensity, nasal breathing for as long as you can. There is a transition period where you will need to go to mouth breathing, but only in like the top 5-10% of intensity exercise. High intensity nasal breathing for as long as possible, then we go into mouth breathing. This is some work from the guys at Paraspeed Endurance, who are good friends of mine, done some training with them, and they came up with a gear system here. I love this. So this is gear 1, gear 2, gear 3, gear 4, gear 5. Gear 1 is low aerobic. Gear 5 is high anaerobic. So this is when we're using oxygen only. This is when we're using things like glycogen. In between, we are going from nasal breathing eventually into mouth breathing. But if you think about why you exercise and the bulk of your exercise is probably to get fitter and healthier, this is more your performance side up here. So if you are performing, you will need to go into mouth breathing, but going through the gears to get there. So this will be your walking, your steady state cardio. Say if you were to do more intervals, higher intensity intervals, you could stick with gear 2. And then eventually get into gear 3, where it's power nasal in, power nasal out. That's say you're going for more intense exercise or intense intervals when you're running or rowing or riding or even doing CrossFit. You can do a lot of this stuff nasal breathing. Gear 4, this is a transition as well. We go nasal in, mouth out. Heavier breathing, but still nasal breathing in. And gear 5, this is when you're doing like a Fran or something like that, where you're doing a lot of contractions in a short amount of time. That's an anaerobic system working overdrive, and that's where the mouth breathing will come in. And the best thing to do is have this happen autonomously, but at the start, spending a lot of time in these gears 1 to 3 and getting used to the nasal breathing in and out. How to improve your CO2 tolerance. So if you had a pretty average CO2 tolerance and BOLT score, then nasal breathing all the time. That's what you should be doing. You should be nasal breathing right now. You should be nasal breathing for the rest of your day. That's going to force your body to offload CO2 at a slower rate than what you used to. If you think about yourself mouth breathing and breathing through your chest, you're trying to get rid of that CO2. Practice short breath holds. Get used to CO2 being in the system. So just taking an inhale and just sitting with it. You'll become more conscious. You'll become more aware. If you've ever been stressed before, and sometimes my wife will tell me this, who I think's on the call, she hasn't dropped off yet, she'll tell me to just take a breath. If that breath was like, she'll tell me to take 3 breaths through my nose. And all of a sudden, you're more conscious and you're more aware and you're able to make better decisions. The hyperventilation activity that we did, we've seen that increase the BOLT in the CO2 tolerance in the short term. So very, very good for improving your performance. Let's talk about down regulation. This is when we're going to wind down a little bit and get into a state of relaxation. So down regulation is as important as up regulation. We need to know how to down regulate. We need to know how to slow your heartbeat to increase your digestion, increase heat as well, body heat, focus, creativity, and this will help with anxiety as well. Going back to the nervous system, we're activating the purple now, the parasympathetic. So this, you need a chair or something to sit on. You can sit on the floor as well. For this one, much more relaxed than what we did. All you need to do is breathe through your nose. But I want those breaths to be nice and smooth. Okay, so we're not doing this, just relaxing at this point. We're going to take 10 slow, smooth breaths through your nose. Let's do that together. Close your eyes if you want to. And out. Out. And next. Out. And next. Out. And exhale. 5 more in your own time. Okay, finish up there. Quick check-in, how are you feeling? Bit warmer, colder, more saliva maybe? It's parasympathetic system switching on, telling you might be digesting. What we're going to do now is do the same thing, but this time with alternate nasal breathing. This is a breathing technique to get oxygen to both sides of the brain and to further enhance the parasympathetic nervous system. What you need is a thumb and an index finger. Okay, hopefully we've got a thumb and index finger to work with. The thumb is going on one side of the nose like this, and I'll inhale through one side. I'll cover that side, and I'll exhale through the other side. I'll inhale through that side. I'll cover
And then exhale through the other side. I want you to pick this up with me now. Inhale. Cover. And exhale. Inhale. Cover. And exhale. Slow breaths. 5 more in your own time. And 1 more. Exhale. Beautiful. And just sit and observe. And our last breathing practice, you can do this in your own time. It's going to be 10 breaths through your nose only. I want you to think about that breath circulating the whole body, and I want you to make it as light as possible. So as silent as possible, as soft as possible, using the diaphragm. When you're ready, 10 breaths in and out through the nose. And then finishing your last breath, just do a quick check-in. You might feel more warmth in the body. You might feel more saliva in the mouth. You might feel lighter. You might feel better. So guys, thanks a lot for... Okay, I'll be back. Keep breathing, guys. Keep breathing. I'm going to work this out again.
Change hands to
Maybe.
stop share. Red one.
Stop. Oh, yeah. There we go. We're back. We're back. Well, everyone's looking very relaxed.
Yeah, I'm pretty glad.
Yeah. That's great. Guys, that concludes Breathing for Life, the workshop. Thanks a lot for tuning in. If you've got any questions, please post them in the chat now. If you need to run, that's cool, but we're going to have some question time now. We realise we've gone a little bit over. That's,
we're smack bang.
Are we?
7 minutes to go.
Oh, good. There you go.
That was one of my feedback pieces. Be better with time management. Success.
Let's see what the chat says, LB.
Yeah.
And we'll,
Yeah, no talking all at the same time. I'll have a look at the chat box.
chat box is a winner. Okay.
No criticisms of my drawing this time.
Is it normal to feel dizzy after lying forward while breathing into the ribcage? That drill we did. Explain that one.
Can be. It's not optimal. That's not the most comfortable exercise as a release. So, in honesty as well, with that, we're going to be getting the outer fibers of the diaphragm, which is a good thing. It can help the whole thing relax. The exercises Steve's taking you through, if you think about it, you're breathing through the nose, which is helping your diaphragm lower. That also acts as a really good stretch for mobility of the diaphragm. So if that was something that was uncomfortable for you or made you feel dizzy, I would suggest not so much doing it. There are a number of reasons that you might experience dizziness. Probably the primary one would be as you're leaning forward, there's basically a change in blood pressure in your cranium. So, you know, sometimes when you're laying in bed and as soon as you get up, you feel a bit dizzy. There are a few things in your brain you might want to look up. Baroreceptors, there's a reflex in that. So basically when you change for your head position from here to here, it takes a little while for the blood to kind of pump back up to the brain. So you might feel a little bit kind of dizzy when you do that. Likewise, though, if it's something like you haven't had enough water or you haven't had breakfast, you just might have low glucose or something at the moment. So it's very hard to tell exactly. My suggestion with mobility is always, it shouldn't be painful. It might be uncomfortable. There's a difference between pain and discomfort. So I would put dizziness when you're leaning forward as, I'd put that on more the pain side of things than the discomfort. It's probably not a great thing. So I'd probably utilize some of the nasal breathing type stuff Steve's just done. So hopefully that helps.
Any more questions, guys?
Only got one.
Before we've got one here. Either.
There we go.
In the climate of, oh, that's a good question. In the current climate of wearing masks, we are inherently going to be inhaling more CO2. Is that going to increase CO2 tolerance? That's a really good question. Jeez, you know,
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Steve?
Okay, so on the mask thing, the more you can breathe through your nose, the better, right? So I found the mask being somewhat of a good reminder of how much you're breathing through your mouth. Because as soon as you breathe through your mouth, you really know it. You can still breathe through your nose with the mask. When you can, pulling it down when you're not around people, obviously to breathe through your nose is going to be a good one. In terms of it increasing the CO2 tolerance, I can't see the link there. It's not to say it shouldn't, but I just can't think of it myself. Do you have any thoughts?
I can't think of it. The honest answer is I don't know. Probably the only research I've read on masks recently is just around the spread of the virus, which by the way it decreases it by 50 to 80%. So masks are probably a good thing for what's going on at the moment. Hard to tell as well though, because when you breathe in, this is just me thinking out loud, when you breathe in, you're going to be breathing in air from around you. That air is not just oxygen and carbon dioxide. Again, most of it's nitrogen. You've got oxygen in there, you've got carbon dioxide in there. In most masks, there's going to be something from the side. So I imagine airflow is still coming in, although not as good. So maybe you're inhaling a little bit more CO2. In terms of improving your tolerance, don't know. I can't see the link either, but that's not to say it's not there. If I ever read around or find something, you can always post it up on we'll post it up on Steve's Instagram because I don't have one. So yeah.
Can you recommend any apps or podcasts that can help guide you through guided breathing exercises? Yeah, I think the Headspace app is a good one. That's got a bunch of meditation techniques.
That's a good one for now too. Yeah.
There's also some free diving ones that I can't remember the name of. The guys from Shift Adapt are really good. They're more tailored towards the performance and mental health sides. So Shift/Adapt. And performance-wise, Oxygen Advantage have got some great content. So if you just Google Oxygen Advantage, they do the training on this stuff. And I recommend all of their exercises.
What was the guy on Joe Rogan's podcast recently?
Oh, James Nestor? James Nestor, yeah.
Not so much exercises, but podcast is pretty interesting.
Yeah. He's just written a book called Breath,
And that's out at the moment. It sort of ties together the history of breath and ties together a lot of the different elements of what we spoke about and puts it into a very palatable form.
Yeah.
So breath by James Nestor. The podcast is excellent too. What's your day-to-day rundown? When I wear a mask, I feel dizzy. Is this from more CO2? Yeah, it could also be through breathing more. Like if you think when you're wearing a mask, it makes breathing pretty uncomfortable. It can create a bit of a stress state in the body. So that could be just due to you breathing more and feeling a slight hyperventilation effect.
Yeah, could just be that psychological discomfort with things. I think with these questions that are coming through about the current situation, I think overall they're very important questions, but I think the true answer to them is no one really knows yet. Like, this is still early days so, whilst we're both qualified in these sorts of things, there are a lot of you probably know some people with medical advice, they're probably the ones who are the least likely to tell you what's right and wrong at the moment. You jump on Facebook and people will be telling you exactly the answer, but they're probably unqualified. It just means the situation is difficult. So yeah, a lot of the answers we can theorise and hypothesise, but exactly whether that's right or not, we're not sure. So take it with a grain of salt. You could definitely draw bows, but they might be long bows. So yeah, long story short, not too sure.
Yeah, all we can say is, look, breathing through your nose is going to be optimal at this time, whether you've got a mask or not.
And yeah, the other thing is with both stress and also oxygenation of blood, you're not going to be in a mask 100% of the time. So when you're at home in a private space, whether it be your bedroom before going to bed or when you get up in the morning, you're in your own space. So control the things that you can control. So that includes your breathing practice as well. Put a short period of time aside each day to practice these things and see if they do work for you. I think that's a more positive and proactive approach as opposed to worrying about kind of the ins and outs of things that you can't really change. So for instance, you can't go outside without a mask at the moment, it's mandated. So we can't control that, you can't control that, but you can control what you do in your own space, and that is the breathing. So
you can control you're doing your exercises and becoming a better breather. So when you do wear a mask, it's not so uncomfortable for you.
Yeah.
It's a really good question about how to incorporate the upregulation and downregulation exercises. This depends on what sort of person you are and what sort of makeup you are, but generally morning upregulation, evening downregulation, pre-workout upregulation activities, post-workout downregulation activities. And that's as simple as, like, the sun's going up, we're looking for a cortisol response in the body. We're looking to get the sympathetic nervous system active there. So ideally doing this stuff in the sun first thing in the morning, that really sets you up for the day and gets you into the proper biological rhythms that we're designed for. And also downregulation, turn the lights off, slow breathing, get like lying on the floor. That's going to create a good parasympathetic response.
Very context specific, isn't it? So if you have like a more challenging cognitive task, you might want to downregulate and drive more parasympathetic, be clear and logical thought. I don't know what you think about balance and that sort of thing. Would you downregulate pre-balance? Balance work?
Balance work, like exercise.
Like in exercise,
yeah. Yeah.
So it depends on the exercise too. So if you're about to do Fran, I'm upregulating. I'm ready to go. If I'm doing something that requires precision and control, I might think about downregulating. But play with it yourself too. You might find you upregulate and you just a gun.
And you might find that this way on the spectrum, you might think, oh, I need to downregulate, but you're already downregulated. So maybe bringing yourself into some sort of energy into the body can be good.
That links back to that slide, that eustress and distress kind of slide that Steve had before. Where are you? Are you over or understimulated? And how do you get back to peak performance? So it depends where you are. If you're overstressed and hyped up on coffee, maybe I'll downregulate to get back to peak performance. If I'm already at a zillion coffees and then I train, Jesus Christ, my head's going to explode. So
All right, this is a good one. Exercise. Yeah, this is good. Dr. LB, why when doing very intense exercise, think 2K row, do you taste blood? My guess is because at levels of intense breathing, pressure causes blood to cross over the thin airway wall from tryst-nols.
Yeah, interesting from tryst-nols. Well, A, you shouldn't taste blood in rowan. You're probably going a little bit too hard.
Have you seen him do a 2K? Right?
Yeah, he does go hard. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. To my knowledge, yeah, I think you're on the right track with it. I'd have to look at it exactly. So leave it with me. I'll have a look at a little bit of the research on it and see. But yeah, it depends on where the blood's coming from. But yeah, it might be that the walls are very, very thin and you're getting blood passing through, or it might be something in the upper respiratory tract here that's not working too hard, and forceful exhalation might remove cells in the lining of your throat. Can be a couple of things, but I wouldn't say that's a great thing. I wouldn't be swallowing blood whilst rowing. I think you need to down-regulate a little bit.
This is a really good one from Nora, which I'm going to pitch to you as well. I'm never feeling dizzy during a workout, no matter how hard it is, right? However, I start feeling lightheaded dizzy when doing heavy or tempo squats. And firstly, why would that be? I know you've got a good answer there. And is there any specific breathing exercise I could do beforehand to help with this?
So what's part one of the question?
Part one was, why do I feel lightheaded and dizzy when doing heavy or tempo squats?
Part of it will be holding your breath, most likely. So the other part of that is blood pressure. So your blood pressure will change. There'll be more force on the system, so more pressure on the system, which results in lightheadedness. So think about the blood pressure side of things as the answer to that. What was the second part of it?
Or any breath exercises to help with that?
I'd just be focusing on the breathing between sets. So, once you finish a set, sit down, relax, down-regulate, focus on your nasal breathing, chill out. That'll get more oxygen in the system. So probably that's coming from, change in blood pressure, probably a decrease in oxygen going up to the brain. But yeah, I'd just be focusing on the between sets thing. So there is a time and space for that kind of stress when you are lifting heavy. We don't want to be in it all the time as well. Steve and I speak, at length about these sorts of things, particularly with CrossFit athletes. It's always intense, and that's probably not the right way to train, in our opinion. We think you should probably be, training at, what do you think, 70-80% intensity most of the time. That's enough for your physiological adaptations without stressing the system too much.
And you can monitor that through nasal breathing as well. It'll trip you up as well, like trying to do a workout nasal breathing. It is tough, but it's going to make you fitter. It's going to make you healthier, and not as you'll recover a lot better from that.
And if you get better CO2 tolerance by practicing that POLT test that Steve took you through, potentially that other problem with the dizziness might be an intolerance to your CO2. So if you improve that, then potentially that'll go away as well. So multiple avenues to look at. One, it will be a blood pressure thing. Two, it might be an intolerance thing. But again, control what you can control, which is in between your sets, you're focusing on your breathing, down regulating, and then getting back to the bar and going again.
Albin, when it comes to asthma, what part of the breathing process is breaking down?
They're struggling to get air out, I believe. So it's just basically there's a constriction of the airways, so it's trouble getting air out of the lungs. So that's essentially the part that's breaking down. Things will bronchoconstrict, so they'll kind of tighten up a little bit. So the airways essentially will close down. So when we were talking about before, if you breathe in through your nose, it'll vasodilate and bronchodilate. That's what we want to do. I was reading actually some interesting research on asthma the other day, and James Nestor talks about it in that podcast we mentioned as well. He said with asthma, as soon as they feel like they can't breathe, it's and that's kind of that hyperventilation which makes things worse. What you should actually do is slow the breathing right down, start thinking about slow nasal breathing, and that helps with the asthma. So the nasal breathing actually opens up the airway. That allows more air in, so more oxygen and gas transfer during that process as well. So yeah, essentially think of asthma as that tract that goes down into the lungs is narrowed. You now know some tools to open that up a little bit as well. Not saying that is a cure-all, because it's certainly not. There's still room for Ventolin and the spacers and all those types of things. They have chemicals in it to help open up the airways when you are suffering an asthma attack or whatnot. But yeah, essentially narrowing the airways.
All right.
That
seems to be it. Crushed it.
Actually one more's come through.
One more.
Is Steve single?
Oh, God. Nothing about Albie's private life. I wasn't expecting that to be the first question. Anything. Nothing.
Tryst-Nols, I thought Tryst-Nols rather than talking about one in his mouth.
You think a bit let down by
Tryst-Nols.
Tryst-Nols.
That's interesting. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, nothing. All right. Guys, if you want to connect with us, then you can do that on the socials. Well, me on the socials, you not so much, LB.
I'm underground.
But he's underground, like a good cafe, he says here. So you can connect with us on various socials there, email, Instagram, YouTube. I've got a bunch of breathing exercises on YouTube as well. I'll post this on YouTube as well. It'll take a while to upload, but it'll all be there, and we'll send you the slides after this as well. Thanks a lot for tuning in, guys. Enjoy your day. Breathe well. Cool. All right. Why is the juice still there?
You need to finish the session.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to be the one to finish it, though. I was
Yeah,
waiting.
you have to.
I do? Okay, I'll finish. See you, Liz.